The Eagle arrived just after sunrise and refused to leave. At first, the men on the pier thought it was a good omen. The harbor at Port Lawson always woke early. Before the tourists came with their cameras and paper cups of overpriced coffee, before the charter boats hauled out clients in bright rented jackets, the place belonged to the working men and the gulls. Nets slapped damp wood, engines coughed to life, buckets clanged. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and yesterday's fish scales. It was the kind of place where people noticed weather, tide, and trouble long before they noticed anything beautiful. So when a bald eagle landed at the far end of the fishing pier and stayed there, heads turned. Not because eagles were unheard of along the Washington coast. They came and went often enough, gliding over the water or settling high in the pilings where no one bothered them. But this one was different. It had not chosen a roofline or a harbor light. It had landed right on the wet boards beside the bait table, folded its broad dark wings halfway, and stayed put even as people moved around it, shouting and working and wheeling coolers past. "Would you look at that?" muttered Ray Hensley, who had fished those waters for 30 years and still treated every large bird with the same grudging respect he gave weather forecasts and old women who read storms in their bones. The eagle didn't answer, of course. It only stood there, massive. Brown body slick with sea mist, white head bright against the gray dawn, hooked beak half open as if breathing was harder than it should have been. One wing hung lower than the other, not fully broken maybe, but wrong. The bird's yellow eyes tracked every movement near it, fierce and clear, but it made no move to fly. "Somebody call wildlife," said another fisherman. "Nah, it'll take off when it's ready." But it didn't. By 7:30, half the regulars on Pier 3 had noticed the eagle. It tolerated them the way an exhausted king might tolerate peasants, with visible disdain and no actual ability to leave. It snapped once at a gull that came too close. It shuffled a foot or two away from the bait table when a deckhand rolled a cart past. Then it stopped again and resumed staring out at the water with an intensity that made several men uneasy for reasons they could not quite explain. At 8, a family arrived. They were not part of the harbor's usual morning scene. The father had the look of someone on vacation trying too hard to be relaxed. The mother carried a bag full of snacks, sunscreen, wipes, and all the small objects children apparently require to stand near water for 20 minutes. Their daughter, Lucy, was 8 years old, all freckled nose and untied shoelaces, with the restless curiosity of a child who had not yet learned which things adults found ordinary. She saw the eagle before anyone in her family did. "Mom, Mom, look." Her mother turned and gave a startled little gasp. "Oh my God!" The father instinctively took Lucy by the shoulder and steered her back. "Stay clear." But Lucy, from the safe distance of 6 feet, looked not at the eagle's face or wings or talons. She looked lower, then she frowned. "Dad," she said, "there's something on it." Ray Hensley, who was close enough to overhear, glanced over. "On what?" "On its wing." The girl pointed with the solemn certainty children use when they know they've seen something real and adults haven't caught up yet. Ray stepped sideways for a better angle. At first all he saw was the ragged layering of wet feathers. Then the eagle shifted slightly, opening the damaged wing just enough for something dark to swing beneath it. Not a feather, not seaweed, a line, thin, black, taut where it disappeared under the wing, and hanging from it was a small glint of metal. "Son of a—" Ray stopped himself because of the child. "It's tangled." Now that he had seen it, he could not unsee it. Fishing line, the nearly invisible kind. It looped around the eagle's wing joint and trailed downward where something heavy was still attached below the edge of the pier. The little girl had been right, and the expression on the eagle's face changed the moment a few people understood. It did not look merely injured now. It looked braced, as if expecting the next move in a struggle it had already been losing for too long. Ray looked over the edge of the pier. The morning tide slapped against the pilings below. Gulls wheeled and screamed. Nets bumped the hulls of moored skiffs. At first he saw nothing but chop and shadow. Then the line twitched. "Hold on," he said sharply. The eagle turned its head and stared directly at him. Ray followed the line down with narrowed eyes. There, beneath the edge of the pier in the dark water between pilings, something pale moved. A bird, smaller than the eagle, gray and white, struggling weakly against the tide. It was hanging half-submerged from the same tangle of line. "What is it?" Lucy's father asked from behind him. Ray's face had gone hard. "Some kind of gull." The child stepped nearer despite her father's grip. "Is it alive?" "Barely." The harbor changed all at once after that. What had been an oddity became an emergency. Someone called the Marine Wildlife Hotline, someone else called the harbor office. A younger deckhand ran for bolt cutters, though no one was yet foolish enough to think he could simply walk up and snip line from a bald eagle without consequence. The gull beneath the pier flapped weakly, each movement sending tension back up the line and through the eagle's wing. That, everyone realized, was why the eagle had not left. It couldn't. Or maybe more precisely, it would not. It had gotten tangled trying to take the gull, perhaps as prey, perhaps as competition over a fish carcass, perhaps in some blind instant of instinct, and the monofilament had lashed them together in a cruel web of hooks and swivels and dropped tackle. Now the gull was drowning by inches below the pier while the eagle stood trapped above, neither able to free itself without dragging the other farther into death. Lucy's mother put a hand over her mouth. "That's horrible." The little girl didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the gull below. By the time Officer Natalie Briggs from Washington Fish and Wildlife arrived, a small crowd had formed despite repeated requests not to gather. Natalie had the compact build and direct stare of someone who spent more time outdoors than behind a desk, and had long ago lost patience with people who treated wild animals like props in their own emotional dramas. She took in the scene in one sweep: eagle on the pier, monofilament around the wing, entangled gull below. Pier crowded with unhelpful concern. "All right," she said. "Everybody back, especially the child." Lucy was ushered back a few steps but resisted enough to say, "Please help them both." Natalie glanced at her once and nodded. That's the plan. The problem was immediate and ugly. You could not safely free the eagle without controlling the bird, but you could not safely net or blanket the eagle without first reducing the tension from the gull in the water below. At the same time, pulling the gull up risked panicking the eagle, which could break the wing entirely or send hooks deeper into both animals. And there was something else. The gull was not simply tangled. When Harbormaster Dean Wallace leaned over with a boat hook and got a better look into the water, he swore under his breath, "There's more down there." "What do you mean?" Natalie asked. Dean pointed. Another line, thicker, almost invisible in the ripples, ran from the gull to a collapsed mass of tackle and bait wire wrapped around the piling below. A whole nest of fishing debris had collected there, and the smaller bird had become ensnared first. The eagle had likely swooped down, grabbed it or struck near it, and become caught in the same death trap. Lucy, still listening despite being told not to, whispered, "They're both stuck." Exactly. Natalie made decisions quickly. "Dean, I need a skiff under that piling. Ray, you still climb like you think you're 30? Ray gave her a flat look. "Only when someone says I can't." "Good. You're with me." "And me," said Tomas Ruiz, a charter captain who had seen enough bad things pulled from water to stop asking permission before helping. "I've got gloves." Within minutes, the rescue improvised itself the way most good pier rescues do, partly by training, partly by instinct, and partly by whatever tools happen to be nearest when compassion outruns caution. A skiff was brought around under the pier so Dean and Thomas could work from below. Natalie prepared a heavy towel and restraint blanket for the eagle. Ray and another deckhand rigged a safety line at the pier edge in case anyone leaned too far and let the morning tide make decisions for them. The eagle watched every movement. That was what made it hard. Not because it was wild and frightening, though it was, but because it was alert enough to understand that many things were approaching at once, and too exhausted to choose the proper response to any of them. Twice it opened the damaged wing in a threat display and nearly lost balance. Each time the gull below flapped and choked in the water as the line tightened. "Easy," Natalie murmured, though no one expected the word to mean anything. Dean reached the gull first from the skiff. Up close, it was a juvenile western gull, half-grown, filthy with harbor water, one leg wrapped in line and one wing pinned partly open by a hook caught in the mesh of old tackle. The bird's eyes were bright with terror, but its body was already giving way to cold and fatigue. "Little idiot," Dean muttered, not unkindly. He lifted the gull just enough to take some strain off the line above. Instantly, the eagle shifted. Natalie moved. She threw the towel over the eagle's head and shoulders in one practiced motion and pinned the wings close before the bird could react fully. Even so, the power in that body hit through the blanket like machinery. Talons struck the boards. Ray was beside her in an instant, gloved hands helping secure the legs while she found the line around the injured wing. Lucy made a sound behind her mother that was half fear and half awe. The line was worse than anyone had hoped. Not a single strand, but three. One looped around the joint under the wing. Another ran through the primary feathers and around a swivel embedded in the gull side mass below. A small hook had caught in the outer skin high along the eagle's flank, not deep but enough to make every pull agony. Natalie swore once and began cutting. Below, Dean and Thomas worked the gull free from the piling mess with knives and small cutters. The gull bit both of them in the process, which they accepted as fair. "Got the leg," Dean called. "Wing still stuck," Thomas answered. On the pier, Ray held firm while the eagle trembled under Natalie's hands. "How bad?" "She'll keep the wing if we're lucky." "Male or female?" Natalie adjusted the blanket, exposing the bird's breast markings and size. "Small female." "Course she is," Ray muttered. "Big enough to scare us, small enough to suffer for all of it." Natalie snipped the line around the joint, then carefully backed the barbed hook from the skin along the flank. Blood showed bright for a second, then slowed. The eagle gave one furious convulsion and nearly tore free. "Hold!" Natalie snapped. Below them, the gull suddenly shrieked, sharp and ragged. Then Thomas shouted, "Free!" The tension in the line vanished all at once. The eagle sagged. The gull collapsed into Dean's net in a wet heap of gray wings and rope. For one suspended second, the whole pier fell silent except for the slap of water and everyone's breathing. Then the crowd exhaled as one body. The gull went first to a crate lined with towels, and the eagle to a transport kennel barely big enough to contain the length of her. Natalie worked fast, efficient even with blood on her sleeves. The juvenile gull was cold, underweight, and likely infected around the leg, but alive. The eagle's wing was abraded, strained, and punctured superficially. The bigger risk was shock and soft tissue damage from prolonged tension. As she closed the kennel door, Lucy edged just close enough to be heard and asked in a small voice, "Did she stay because of the gull?" Several adults glanced at Natalie, expecting the usual educational answer about prey dynamics and instinct. Instead, she looked from the girl to the gull crate to the eagle's hard yellow eye visible through the kennel slats. "I think," Natalie said carefully, "she stayed because she couldn't leave and because neither of them could get free alone." Lucy absorbed that, then nodded solemnly. "So yes." No one laughed. No one. At the rehabilitation center 2 towns over, the case became even stranger. The eagle and gull were placed in separate but adjacent treatment spaces, initially because the staff needed to monitor stress, and because no one wanted to create a sentimental story where nature provided none. Eagles kill gulls. That is part of the world. Rescue professionals know this and are wise not to forget it. But in the first 24 hours, something complicated everyone's neat understanding. The gull, once warmed and stabilized, panicked whenever the crate beside it was moved away. The eagle, meanwhile, went into a violent agitation the first time staff wheeled the gull to X-ray, not because the smaller bird was prey nearby, because both had become so bound together by fear, injury, and prolonged entanglement that separation itself had turned into another stressor. "It's not affection," Dr. Maris Chen said to Natalie during the evening update call. But it is association. They were trapped together long enough that the nervous system now reads absence is danger. Natalie sat at the small desk in the harbor office with one hand around a bad cup of coffee and closed her eyes briefly. Of course it does. The town, meanwhile, told the story in widening circles. At first it was just harbor gossip. Then the local paper got hold of it. Then someone posted a blurred photo online of the eagle standing on the pier and Lucy pointing toward the dangling line, and the whole thing gained the shape of a story people needed. The child, the eagle, the gull, the harbor, the entanglement no one had noticed until someone small enough to still look closely said, "There's something on it." Lucy's school asked if she wanted to talk about the rescue at assembly. She hid behind her mother's coat when asked, and then said yes anyway. Ray Hensley pretended to hate the attention while retelling the story 4 different times at the bait shop. Dean Wallace organized a line removal barrel program on the pier by the end of the week. Thomas printed ugly but effective signs that read, "If you drop your tackle, something else pays for it." At the rehab center, the gull recovered faster. Young birds often do, if given the chance. The hook damage in the wing turned out to be superficial. The leg ligature wound was worse, but circulation returned. Within 6 days, the gull was standing, screaming, and trying to attack anyone who changed its water, which Dr. Chen declared excellent progress from a personality standpoint. The eagle was slower. Her wing strain had pulled deeper muscle. The puncture near the flank had avoided major structures, but the inflammatory damage around the joint worried everyone. She needed time, low stress, and gradual flight evaluation before release could even be discussed. Still, she ate. Then she stood. Then she spread the wing halfway. Then, on day 9, she mantled over a fish chunk and glared so fiercely at a volunteer that the man backed out of the room without meaning to. Also excellent progress, Dr. Chen reported dryly. The first animal released was the gull. The harbor crew asked to be told the date but were not, because the rehabilitation staff had learned through experience that public wildlife releases become chaos the second more than 3 humans know about them. Even so, Dean found out anyway from a cousin who cleaned tanks at the center, and by the time Lucy's parents heard, the gull had already been released at a protected cove north of town. Lucy was disappointed for almost an hour. Then Dr. Chen sent a photograph of the gull mid-launch over the water, wing intact, expression furious, and Lucy declared this acceptable. The eagle took another 3 weeks. By then, winter storms had started roughening the coast for real. The harbor smelled colder, fewer tourists came. The men on Pier 3 wore heavier gloves and complained with more conviction, but every one of them kept an eye on the line disposal barrels, and more than once Ray barked at somebody for dropping tackle where you think the sea don't keep count. When the release date finally came, Natalie called only a few people: Ray, Dean, Thomas, Lucy, and her parents. And perhaps because stories like this are allowed one small mercy now and then, the release was held at Port Lawson itself, not on the crowded pier, not where engines idled and tourists wandered, but on the long outer breakwater at dawn, where the sea opened wide and the gulls had not yet taken full ownership of the morning. The eagle stood in the transport crate with her head high when Dr. Chen opened the door. For 1 second she did not move. Then she stepped out onto the concrete, spread the great recovered wings, and the whole little group seemed to stop breathing at once. Lucy clutched her father's hand. Ray removed his cap. Thomas muttered something in Spanish that might have been prayer or admiration or both. The eagle launched, one hard downbeat, then another. Then she was over the water, climbing not perfectly but strongly into the pale gold light above the harbor. She did not circle back for them. Wild things almost never do. But she did wheel once over Pier 3, just once, then turned toward the headland and vanished. Lucy cried anyway. So did her mother. Ray claimed the wind was in his eyes and nobody believed him. Months later, after the story had become the kind of local legend schoolchildren repeat with additions and old fishermen pretend not to cherish, Natalie still thought about that first morning on the pier. Not only the eagle or the gull, the line. That almost invisible dark thread that turned hunter and scavenger, predator and nuisance into a single suffering problem no one would have solved in time if a child hadn't noticed what adults had trained themselves to overlook. When people asked her what the rescue meant, she answered more carefully than they expected. "It means pay attention," she said. "It means the damage we leave behind doesn't stop being ours because the tide takes it. And it means sometimes the first person to really see an emergency is the one everybody was trying to keep back." Lucy liked that answer. She liked it even more after spring, when one windy Saturday at the harbor she spotted an eagle high above the pilings and immediately checked every fishing line in sight, with the solemn vigilance of someone who had once helped save a creature simply by refusing not to notice. Because that was how the story stayed in Port Lawson. A bald eagle refused to leave a fishing pier. Then a child noticed what was hanging from its wing, and because she did, two wild lives went back into the sky and sea instead of disappearing beneath a knot of line no one claimed.